So we talked about the apocalyptic religions. Now let's talk about the promised land. This is the place. Mormons believe that the Utah Valley was selected and set apart for them to establish.
So it goes into some little bits of Mormon history.
That's kind of a beef I have with a lot of ex-Mormon criticisms of, like, it's kind of funny. Like, I know in the Book of Mormon musical, he has that I Believe song where he says, I believe that the Garden of Eden was in Jackson County, Missouri. That's kind of funny. But we never really criticized other religions for having their sacred places. It's just we're not used to any sacred places being in the U.S. So when you say that something absolutely sacred is Salt Lake City, it's kind of like hearing, Detroit is a sacred city or something like that. But we totally make an allowance for Mecca. So it's just a little nitpick I have with a lot of ex-Mormons acting like that's such an absurd thing. Like I don't think that the Garden of Eden probably existed, but was in Jackson County, Missouri. But I think it's just as absurd to place it in Jackson County, Missouri, as it would be to place it, I don't know, in Jerusalem.
Tajikistan.
And they don't Mormons don't even put that level of importance on it. Like as soon as Mormons got to the Salt Lake Valley, they've been leaving it, and it's fine. It's not like, because like for Mecca, all Muslims are supposed to, unless they're, as long as you're able, God commands you to go to Mecca once in your life, at least, and like, the king of Saudi Arabia, one of his titles is the protector of the two holy cities. Like that's the level of importance they put on it. Whereas like in Mormon, it's like God led the people here, but it doesn't say, and they shall reside here forever and ever and ever, and there will never be any reason to leave. And if you do, you're a dick. Like, no,
it's kind of just he told us to go here because it wasn't legal to kill Mormons here.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. But I mean, it's just part of his whole alarmism thing. Larson's got to build this up into something a little bigger than it is.
Are oftentimes most prominent are David O. McKay and Ezra T. Benson. Ezra Taft Benson. Ezra Taft Benson had served in the 50s in the Eisenhower administration as Secretary of Agriculture. And so he had connections into Washington, and he bought into the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society was the predecessor to all the stuff that we have going on right now. They were very conspiratorial.
The reason I came up with a nickname for him for type 2 John, because it could be both type 2 diabetes and type 2 error, that's not a pregnant person when it is a pregnant person. A type 2 error is the problem with Benson is that a couple times he wasn't right, but in most cases he was right. He was most of the times he was right, calling communists commies.
Plus, he wasn't he wasn't a wuss. I feel like that's my biggest beef with like Mormon leadership now is that they're just giant wimps. They're spineless cowards.
Yeah, for sure.
You might say, okay, well, what do I take from it? That seemed like a really confusing time period. And to me, that's kind of the point. That time period was really confusing. And what was being confused in that time period? And I think the answer was liberalism and Marxism. Going into the 60s, we had clear ideas of what those two terms meant. Liberalism was seen as the default value of Americans, and Marxism meant that you were either a communist or a socialist. And at the time, Marxism hadn't been popularly tied in with identity politics or with critiques of power structures in America outside of economics. So I see the New Left as the time period where cultural Marxism became popular and became tangled with leftist identity politics and leftist versions of liberalism. And it was basically a decade where those ideas all got tangled together and produced a hybridized spectrum of opinion. I think this added complexity to leftist ideology. And between the lack of attention paid to it and the lack of education around it, leftist politics have become so confusing that people don't really understand the major ideologies in play anymore. And I think we're living with the consequences of it.
So I read this Matt Harris book about Ezra Taft Benson. I need to do like a longer episode on him.
Well, besides, here's the other thing is that everybody knows that John Birch, it was just an idea. There was no leaders.
Was that a civil rights movement was a communist plot, and that people like Dr. Martin Luther.
So I read this
See what you
book. I
did
read
there.
the whole entire thing, and the whole thing stunk because once again, it's coming across like an academic study, and it's just completely biased from one side of stuff. It doesn't get into any detail about where Ezra Taft Benson got it right and was correct. It is a little bit like understanding of why he was so afraid of commies, because he had such firsthand experience with actual commies and actual commie governments and central planning. He got to see the type of starvation that sort of thing would cause firsthand. But he was also right about the commies. Once again, you mentioned Ryan Chapman, right? Watch Ryan Chapman's video on the New Left. And it's true that Martin Luther King, he accused Martin Luther King of being a commie. There's a lot of people who pointed to different sorts of funding and some different people that he had working around him who definitely were commies. But most of the people, well, Martin Luther King himself was a liberal. He's a liberal standout. And part of why the civil rights movement won is because he argued for liberalism. New left movement of the 1960s was mostly commies. And you could be a little bit forgiving of Ezra Taft Benson seeing a group of a movement that's mostly commies and saying all those guys over there are commies because they were out and out open commies.
Yeah, and also we have because Marcuse and some of those guys even wrote about like exactly that. Entryism, using
liberal
African, using African American
liberal
alienation and dissatisfaction as part of their revolutionary tool. Somewhere, I don't know where it is. Somewhere there's a really good Martin Luther King quote though, where he explains exactly why his beliefs are incompatible with communism, which is pretty great.
One of my favorite things in the world is how, like, the most well-known Martin Luther King quote is like it's the most liberal thing that you could possibly say is the content of their character rather than the color of their skin thing. And I love how they've been trying to get around that as like, no, we can't do the whole colorblind thing. No, we can't do individualism. That's bad. And look, here he said, I admit that dream has been, John Oliver did a segment on it. It was terrible. Like where they showed a part where he's like, I admit that dream maybe is a little far off. But then like a minute after he said that, right where John Oliver clipped it out, he again said, I still dream of a place where they're judged on the content of their character. Rather
and
than
there's more. There's
a
a long detailed episode. Adam and Sitch do a long detailed episode of all the liberal angles of Martin Luther King, and they pull out all the quotes. I recommend people to go check out the channel and see that thing.
Yeah.
But one of the
I like how Adam calls him his optimist god.
But I don't know. Sometimes I myself will even say like, man, not to say, oh, thank goodness something happened to Martin Luther King, but there's part of the thing of like people either die heroes or live to become the enemy. And the way like Jon Stewart and all those guys turn from liberals into identitarian nutbags, I kind of worry if Martin Luther King was still around today that he wouldn't have gone down the same path. I hope he wouldn't have. However, if I wanted to argue for Ezra Taft Benson, if I wanted to make like an argument for him on why he might have thought Martin Luther King was a commie, do you want to know who I could bring on the podcast? Every identitarian leftist ever. They will say that Martin Luther King's a commie. They all argue for that. They all push for that. They all have huge mega threads and long podcasts about Martin Luther King actually really was a commie. That's who I could bring on to argue for that.
Well, yeah, you got to do your best to co-opt all of the world heroes. He's like MLK is always going to be a target of that because he's pretty beloved by almost every modern person. And so if you can co-opt him to somehow being illiberal, then you got it.
Yeah,
so this
book, that's the thing is like when he talks about in the quote where he explains exactly why his beliefs are incompatible with Marxism, is he references his Christian faith and says that individuals are individual, like God makes individuals, and that's where he starts with. And that's the thing, that's Martin Luther says is the reason why he can't ever really align with communism. And so, and obviously they don't like people talking about that because they want to pretend he's a commie.
So one of the things about this book is one of the ways I want to point at, now it's just become like a thing of all of ex-Mormons that they can just now smirk at Ezra Taft Benson and say, oh, he was just wrong. Whereas I agree with Jared, like, no, this is one of the guys who was actually more right off than not. They say that he accused Eisenhower's administration of giving into commies. And there's been a lot that's come out from a release of papers. There was KGB infiltration into his administration. And there's this whole other level of actually, if you read this whole entire book, I was looking for smoking guns, and they actually didn't really have that much. Ezra Taft Benson was actually pretty reserved in the stuff that he actually ever said. It was all pretty reserved. What they want to do is they want to tack in every sort of Bundy and every sort of anybody ever as being his fault. Just because he kind of agreed with some of the stuff that this guy's a commie, and he said the Eisenhower administration is a commie. But they would also do this thing. There's this thing he does all throughout this book. He will squish together the words. He'll say, Ezra Taft Benson was against these people, and he said they were for communism or big government. And he always puts that together. He just puts it together of like communism and big government. So he accused people of big government, and this guy would mix in that to being like a commie accusation, like a McCarthyist thing. When he says, you guys are for big government, he would concept creep that and say he called him a commie. It's I want to do a longer episode on all of it.
You gotta read it and review it.
I did read it. Yeah. I've got it in my Audible. There was a couple guys that he accused that there was never any total evidence. And in my book, any sort of level of accusation without full evidence is major no stuff, you know, even if it's once. Even if you were right a bunch of times, if it's once, you got to follow the evidence, you know. But if somebody's wrongfully accused and you don't back off of it when there's evidence of the opposite, you got a problem. But he only did that a couple times, you know. Most of the times he was correct. But he was also in an era where that stuff was really, really on the forefront. But of course, Larson acts like, and this is what the modern day guys are doing too. It's all McCarthyism now.
King, we're just agents of the devil and agents of communism. So the church veers extremely far to the right. And at the time, in the 60s and 70s, there was still a force that kind of balanced them out, and they were still really concerned with marketing. So you had really kind of two divisions among the apostles: those who are embracing American exceptionalism and that nationalism that is inherent in Mormonism, and wanting to run with that further, and those who say, no, we're a global church and we need to do more marketing that appeals. So in that period, you've got Benson getting up and saying all sorts of crazy cuckoo banana stuff, and then you've got the church really, you know, hiring New York Madison Avenue advertising firms and buying ads in Life magazine or Reader's Digest to try to appeal and say, see, we're just...
So which were they, John? Were they going far right nutty cuckoo, or were they going globalist?
Well, he's saying
And
they're
which one
extreme
out?
far right. Like the Mormon church is extreme far right.
It's such nonsense.
Do you not understand what that just ruins? Like, if you call everyone extremists, it just makes me think that, this is what an extremist is, just a guy who, you know, in 2002 was against gay marriage or something like that. Just something, you know, I don't agree with that, but he's an extremist now, so he's not that big of a deal, and it just waters down the word until a real far right extremist comes along, and I don't know how to recognize because they're all extreme.
Yeah. So they talk a little bit about grass and how they're overwatered grass and all that stuff.
So
and then
present day, 2016. Well, first of all, you see in 2010, the movement that Trump built on top of was heavily populated by Mormons.
Like the Patriots, the militia kind of people.
Yeah, well, there's always the Patriots and the militia.
Those kinds of people.
You know, you have like the Bundys,
Yeah.
and the standoff at the Wild Refuge in Oregon, the standoff in Nevada. Those are all Mormon-led incursions. I have not seen one instance of any of these insurrectionists ever being disciplined by the church. What do they do to therapists in Salt Lake City that talk about masturbation?
Excommunicate them.
What do they do to Mormons who point machine guns at federal agents?
Give them like a wink and a nod and a wagging of a finger while like a pat on the back. Actually, don't know.
Yeah, they were with the Bundys, totally. But still, it's so stupid. Yeah, you should be excommunicated.
The church isn't going to back anyone. They're weak.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think he's going to make some of that points right here. He says you had these two different factions, the globalist faction and the nationalist faction going. And I think that globalist faction of the church is what's been winning out for 50, 60 years. Comparing the discipline of what those guys did on their rants or whatever they're doing with their arguments about BLM, Bureau of Land Management, and some sex therapists that say you need to have an open marriage for your mental health. He's like, come on, like you stop comparing apples and stupid oranges.
It's like they have this whole idea that the church should never kick anybody out, no matter how, like, you got rules in an organization. If somebody breaks the rules, they get kicked out. And if you not only break the rules, but try to lead other people away from the organization, why would the organization not kick you out? That was Natasha Parker. I don't feel bad for you for getting excommunicated.
Because the other thing, because I'm trying to think about it in my mind. Because, like, first off, I figure, like, well, no, there's got to be somebody who's been kicked out, who's on the right wing and got kicked out for radical right-wing views. But who would be the one who'd want to blast that? The ex-Mormons don't want to blast that the church is excommunicating far-right extremists. And the far-right extremists aren't blasting that they got excommunicated. You know,
You wanna
like,
know
I'm
how
just trying to figure out,
cowardly
like, what kind of person would actually? Yeah, I just kind of wonder, like, is it because it doesn't happen, or is it because we don't hear about it because nobody cares?
They don't
frankly?
make a podcast off of
Yeah.
it.
It's not really
Nobody,
even like a double standard
exactly.
here.
They're not making a podcast about it.
There's not really even that much of a double standard because, like, you want to know how cowardly the church is. They never excommunicated Tyler Glen because that would be a bad PR move. But like,
They never
but
excommunicated.
he made a
what's his
music
bucket?
video where he spat on Joseph Smith and he like did all of the secret temple things. He is
Oh, that's right.
absolutely on the chopping block for excommunication, like grounds for that. But they're not going to do it because it would be a PR nightmare. And he doesn't.
Yeah, the Imagine
include
Dragons
things like
do it.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're backing off all that sort of stuff. Although John DeLynn put out a thing this week saying, "I heard from the grapevine that they're going to up the councils of he put out a post. Did you see that?
Yeah, I did.
don't
Where
remember
he's
that.
like
some-
Quentin Cook or someone said there was troubling thing of fewer disciplinary councils or
They
whatever.
need to do more disciplinary councils.
Oh yeah, that
The
one.
movement that is around in Mormonism right now is super scary.
Is
So,
it super
We look at Mormons
scary?
in Trump's inner circle, which was very anti-environmentalist. You have Rob Porter, who's the White House staff secretary. There's a great article in the Deseret News. I read it this afternoon. It was right before it was found out that he's beating up his wife and cheating on her. You remember that? That was in the early days of the Trump administration. Just gushing about this LDS guy and in the halls of power and how wonderful Mormons are and all their stuff.
Yeah,
Do-
man.
do you get
Before you
giddy
find
about
out before you find out that somebody is a piece of shit, you think they're not a piece of shit. I don't know why. Like, they were gushing about this guy until they found out that he was a piece of shit.
He's giddy about
Saying,
it.
we didn't know this guy
Yeah,
Paul
yes.
is a Mormon. Paul Gossner is a Mormon. I mean, these guys are fucking nuts, right? Mike Lee,
Because they're
Trump's inner circle.
conservatives. Mike Lee, I've listened to a lot of Mike Lee. Like Mike Lee, every single thing I've ever heard Mike Lee says is pretty based, and I mean he sounds more like a lawyer than anything if you listen to him talk about any sort of concept. Of course he's conservative, but he's not nuts.
Well, the
Circle.
only example he used was the guy who like hit his wife. Apparently, I don't know anything about that if he actually did or not. But like, other than that, he just keeps saying this guy. They're all nuts. And giving no examples of what makes them nuts.
Mike Lee is not nuts. Mike Lee is almost kind
That's
of a
pretty easy if you say
boring
somebody
policy
was.
wonk.
Yeah, if you say
Yeah.
somebody was on the Trump administration, that's all you have to do to then say they're nuts. They're
Yeah.
far right extremists.
Owens is a Mormon. If you take Mormons who were middle of the road, like Jeff Lake and Bob Bennett, and those guys were systematically drummed of office. The
Rhinos.
church has
Yeah.
been moving and further right. And I pointed out that the Deseret Book got rid of all their political stuff. But 8 years ago, if you would have walked into a Deseret Book, you would have seen prominently displayed the books by Sean Hannity. And of course, Glenn Beck is a Mormon. So his stuff, but you would see nothing representing any views outside of conservative politics.
Oh my
and I
God.
don't want to make it sound like there's this side and this side, because that's not
You
true.
can't find Glenn
That's
Beck there
funny.
anymore. You can't find
That's funny.
But why is that? Because I mean, I think Larson makes a point somewhat here later on. He says, well, I don't think the church really goes with anything except for what keeps them in line with the powers that be. And so why are the powers that be going to be Ibram X. Kendi nowadays instead of whatever conservative stuff? Because it's the same thing he was saying earlier. There's been a power shift. There's been a hegemony change. And you are the hegemony now, John Larson, you and your guys. And that's why they're going to put in political books there that now appease your side, that appease the globalist side. And I do think that the Mormon church, if I haven't been crazy critical about them on this thing, but the thing I'll get most critical about them with is I think that they are set to cower to this globalist movement of whatever sort of like, well, as we were talking about, the complete merger of corporation and state. And I think the Mormon church, more often than not, with the bureaucrats that are now running the whole entire thing, they are more set to just fall in line with it than to ever stand up against it.
No, I think all that the Mormon church has preached for like the last, I don't know, my entire lifetime has been don't rock the boat. That's like their number one
Yeah,
value.
don't
is
rock the
ever
boat.
be mean.
Yeah.
And so like you get that even with, I remember like Hinckley was my guy growing up, you know, he was my favorite prophet. He was the prophet I remember growing up. And then you go back and do that Larry King interview where he was like, I don't think we teach that you become gods. And I was like, oh my God, he just like, he's a coward. He's
backing off
because
He
that
doesn't-
is a view that rocks the boat. If you say, and I wish they would just own the weird things they believe. Like, yeah, we believe in a star called Kolob that's closest to God's planet. Fuck you.
It's one of the reasons I like the Midnight Mormons, because they push for that. They back that. They say just roll with it. Stand up for yourself. Do the stuff. And they get kind of angry at the bureaucratic boomers that run the church right now that are all lawyers and not visionaries. You know, they're just lawyers. They're just lawyers. And I've watched in my own businesses and that sort of stuff, I watched how risk aversion alone can start to just look like corporate global fascism. You know what I mean? just by following what might cause you a risk and putting in what you might get screamed at about, it just ends up looking exactly like WF forum stuff, you know.
There's this conservative Kabbalah that's getting crazier and crazier and crazier. Dan Crenshaw was assaulted by other Republicans at the Republican State Convention in Texas.
Didn't happen.
Eyepatch McCain. Hey, Eyepatch McCain. Look at Eyepatch McCain right here. You're a rhino. You're a globalist. You're a globalist rhino. You're a globalist rhino. Hey, you're a globalist rhino. Eyepatch McCain. Eyepatch McCain. Eyepatch McCain. You're a globalist rhino.
Do you know who this guy is?
So weird.
Watch him later. So watch this guy fall towards the end of it. This is what they're claiming is the assault. That guy falling right there, that's the assault. Did you see it?
So stupid.
Real Dr. Fauci.
This is him. This is that guy.
I
is
love
who.
this guy.
Please stand up. Please stand up. Vaccinate your mom. Vaccinate your dad. Vaccinate the happy. Vaccinate the sad. Vaccinate
This is
the
what
babies,
Larson's
vaccinate them. Even if they got rabies, vaccinate my life.
hyperventilating about.
Vaccinate your DNA. Vaccine created by the CIA. Vaccinate your body. Vaccinate me at the party. Vaccination.
He's a
I want
comedian.
the vaccine in my life. I want the vaccine for my wife. I want to vaccinate you all day long. Vaccinate you while I wear my thong. Vaccinate me. Vaccinate who? Vaccinate she. Vaccinate her. Vaccinate them. Vaccinate my friend. I want to vaccinate to the end. Vaccinate me. Pure. I love you. What can I say? One more time. Vaccinate the community. Vaccinate your body. Vaccinate your life. Even vaccination party. I love y'all. Peace.
That's who you're hallucinating about, John Larson.
That's one of the far right Bundy extremists. That's the threat to all of peace and
that's
humanity.
who's attacking Dan Crenshaw. And why are they attacking Dan Crenshaw? The reason that they don't like Dan Crenshaw is because they found out that Dan Crenshaw is completely up with the World Economic Forum. He's part of the World Economic Forum. He's a member of the World Economic Forum, and they're coming after him because he just gets in line with all their stuff. He's a rhino.
The Republican Party this weekend not only condemned homosexuality as being aberrant, but they put in the platform of the Texas Republican Party that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president. I think for most of human history, those were fighting words.
I believe he knows he's an illegitimate president. He knows that there were a bunch of different reasons why the election turned out the way it did. And
that would have gotten you invaded.
There is more serious stuff. Like, for example, this clip with AOC. So let me get this straight. When an elected official publicly says that a government certified order is illegitimate, it's not a threat to our democracy, right? Right? Or
and it's just the amount of corruption that's gone so far.
So, and just yesterday, AOC was at the Supreme Court leading a chant of this decision illegitimate, this decision illegitimate, this decision illegitimate. But we already know. I mean, there was a million different people around the time that Trump got elected that said it was illegitimate. Even the person they had start off the January 6th speakings, he was a guy who voted to declare Trump's presidency illegitimate, and he's the one who started the January 6th hearings.
The Democrats immediately make a huge blunder, and their blunder is they're going to allow Congress people to grandstand. This is the stupidest thing. It is incredibly stupid, because here's the thing. If the Democratic agenda is to grandstand, if it is an electoral ploy, you at least don't want to let the American public know that it's an electoral ploy. And yet they lead off with Benny Thompson. And so here's the thing about Benny Thompson. Leading off of Benny Thompson is a really dumb idea, because Benny Thompson happens to be one of the people who voted against certification of the 2016 election. So if you're talking about the danger to the Republic in not voting to certify legitimate elections, this seems like a bad person to lead it off.
We spent 4 goddamn years hearing about Russia.
Yeah, you're freaking out about climate change, and you think your side there is going to do climate. I don't side with them. You know what they spent most of their time with? They spent their time with spending millions of dollars chasing a boogeyman, chasing a great white whale about the Russia stuff. And now it's been a year and a half of January 6th stuff. That's what your leaders are doing there. Oh, but I don't align with them.
It's just mind-blowing.
American.
Is it mind-blowing, John Larson?
And America's number one. This is God's chosen land. Compound more and more harmful ideas, and the church is kind of for it. The church is like okay with doubling down on all of these, whether it's very conservative or very, very like fundamentalist type of Christian offshoot beliefs. Is that where Am I understanding correctly?
I think you're giving the church way too much credit. The church is a spineless, money-making Ponzi scheme. I don't think they have any conviction politically. I think they'll do whatever preserves their power.
This contradicts yourself, though. If they do that, you can put their power-preserving, privilege, epistemic, pushback power, whatever, into making that lake better. I mean, that's one of the things that's manipulative about that, or can be manipulated about.
I think that's one of the problems. But let's move to the question that you're asking. What's the fix? So how do we get out of this mess, right? Well, the legislature...
I love how he does help us fix this problem. I can guarantee you, like, this next little half hour or whatever, which I hope to rush through faster, you're going to find out, right, how to fix this.
You're allocated $40 million to study the problem, right? And it was just announced a week or two ago.
See, that's a contradiction already. $40 million to study the problem.
The Nature Conservancy and the Audubon Society, the Audubon Society, to investigate what can be done. But let's be clear, what needs to change in Salt Lake City will require a very, very deep change in lifestyle by all three elements: by industry, by individuals, and by agriculture. Because agriculture and industry are the lifeblood, kind of a rhetorical position of the conservative movement. It's my belief that they will have a very difficult time reforming those. So, how quickly can Americans adapt?
This is that thing again where it's that triage thing, like saying, like, what are they supposed to do, John Larson? Not stop existing? Like, how do they do what you want them to do?
Well, you and I can try to adapt overnight, but our water usage is insignificant
because you're city dwellers. This is what always happens with people on the left. They all think like, hey, just get your food from the restaurant and stay in your apartment. That's the answer. Stay in your apartment and get your food from the restaurant.
I looked it up, and of water usage in Salt Lake City, 42% is accounted for by individual homes. Well, that means that 58% is by agriculture and industry. So right there, the first and best
I wonder why
is to get industry to step back. But this is a problem we run into with capitalism. I'm going to point out a trait of capitalism. I'm not advocating against capitalism. I'm just saying this is the result.
Yes,
that in mind.
Is a system to take capital investment and grow it. Capitalism is not a system to shrink investment. It basically is a car with an accelerator and no brakes and no reverse. Capitalism has no mechanism for systematic.
And it can part of that investment can be investment into toxic cleanup. Like,
yeah.
I always pen
it's
capitalism.
Such a stupid caricature of capitalism. It's like college freshmen that say this stuff. I can cut them some slack, but like you've been alive and working for decades on planet Earth. How can you honestly believe that that's an accurate assessment of how capitalism functions?
When people talk about how capitalism is not a moral system or whatever, like it's an immoral system. There's he's trying to say that it's, absent of morals. And I always pen capitalism as the most moral economic system because it doesn't claim a morality, basically. That's the sort of the problem with a lot of these more authoritarian economic systems is that like they have prescriptions and they're terrible.
Yeah, exactly. I tried to explain that once to my communist friends, where it's like, because the way I see it is like, I value having the fewest amount of rules that is possible or practical, which is not saying there should be no rules. But like my value is we should tend toward less, not more rules as much as possible.
So Ludwig von Mises, the reason he ever got famous is he did these papers where he talked about socialism and calculation. And one of the things that he was able to point out and pan out and even predicted even future alterations of socialism is that they can't calculate well how to avoid waste. Like you need the free and open system and the death that happens of unsuccessful things and interchanging of commerce, of things that people actually want with each other. I have a clip from Stossel later on this too. But one of the things that he pointed out that's just been true of the whole time, as Flip pointed out with the RLC, is that socialists cause more waste. They cause more waste by far. The central planning, the crappy, slow, idiotic, incapable moving of central planning causes more waste. That's the Mises caucus all comes from Ludwig von Mises, but the reason he got famous, the reason he got a name for himself was proving that centralized planning and socialism causes more waste.
How much longer do you want to go today?
Oh, I don't know if I try to get it done. I could probably jump to stuff.
Not there. Because
I got some clips to skip. So he's bitching about capitalism.
Reduce the amount of whatever it's doing.
I've got a clip right here. We can pump through this quicker. This is Paul Ehrlich, the guy who predicted that
the population disaster.
the population was going to kill us all. But then this is a Reason TV clip that talks about how capitalism has answers for environmental problems, and it's just an easy claim to be made. There's a lot of different people who talk about how capitalism has the answers for environmental problems, not socialism. We can get moving quick on this, because then I have another clip from Victor Davis Hanson, but it's just good enough to point to him. But Victor Davis Hanson once again points to how the socialist central planning screws up the water in California and screws up how it gets allocated and makes everything worse, not better. Let's see. And then he also talks about how through capitalist invention and entrepreneurship, efficiency has just gone through the roof. And he even laments how efficient it's gotten, because he says that there was something more about a community of the people in the hands having to be there to work in the yards that created a whole community. And now it's also teched out that they get 4 or 5 times the yield per acre and with way less water than they used to. But that there's been like a bit of a loss of community and all that. And part of that loss of community is a bit of the thing they're talking about where they get into the homeless thing, because like now these agricultural communities are a bit more broken down and nobody knows anybody anymore. So he laments it, but he also says our efficiency is just through the roof. It's through the roof. Yeah. And that's one of the other things I talked to you or showed you about is, environmentalists, people never want to talk about like gasoline and the use of natural gas. The efficiency of that has quadrupled over the years through innovation. So it pollutes way less than it used to pollute. And they can even get better and better and better at that. Let's see.
No, I mean, we haven't even brought up for me, the single greatest irony of the environmental activism is that it was the anti-scientific misinformation campaign of environmental activists that killed nuclear power.
So he laments that Utah's governor is a farmer, so he probably can't change it. Utah's governor is the world's biggest WF rhino that you've ever seen. This is him kind of pushing all sorts of critical race theory and gender queer theory type stuff. And I promise you, if there's any sort of globalist movement to do anything or take over anything, that he's going to be right in line with it. You don't got to worry about him, John Larson.
Oh yeah, that guy's a piece of shit.
Yeah. He's not the right winger that you like to paint right wingers as. You've got the wrong guy. He says let's talk about this, the basic civics lessons that Flip always loves, that you need to go back to civics 101 stuff.
Political worldview and the power and money that's currently going to these big companies that use the water and these agricultural base, because Utah has the same problem that the country does in general, which is the compromise between the slave states in the beginning gave us the House and the Senate. And so you have senators who are politically way over.
They always have to do this thing where they like talk about the way that our House and Senate got created was through this corrupted process of slave state stuff,
Represented. And the same thing is true in Utah. There are an undue number of Utah senators who represent tiny populations. And
which this is the concept behind a democratic republic. The concept behind a democratic republic is minority populations through these processes get a voice and get their voices heard in senates. And
the Salt Lake City main population is way up.
But they always lament that because our democracy is at risk. They always lament that we actually have a built-up democratic republic, and that it was supposed to have a minority representation that way.
So it's not in their interest to cut off water to Sevier County. It's not in their interest to cut off water to Stampede County. They're going to want to preserve their own profits, their own lifestyle, their own faith-based way of life for as long as they possibly can.
As long as they possibly can.
So he says there's no way to spend ourselves out of a problem, which is wrong.
Is the reason we are really fucked is capitalism. Because there is no way to spend your way out of the problem.
There it is.
There's no amount of money.
This isn't a criticism of capitalism.
So this was my counter.
That's why I say it's woke. It's woke because it's all got that critical consciousness about capitalism. But this isn't, he's not a critic of capitalism. And then one of the things I love is like, we still got a little longer here. This thing was 2 hours and 20 minutes. What did he ever propose in place of it? And that's one of the things about socialists is they get socialists or communists, socialists don't know how. If you listen to James Lindsay's podcast of I think it's called Socialists Don't Know How or Communists Don't Know How, and it's built into their theory that they don't have to say how. In fact, saying how would be unscientific. That's even what Marx would say. Saying how is unscientific.
So the closest things to recommendations that he has in this, and I don't know if you have this in the clip here, but the first one was, nobody's going to go home after watching this and not take a shower tonight, which he then, that's only kind of a suggestion because then he says, but it wouldn't do anything even if you did. And the other one is, I think it might be coming up, or maybe we missed it or something. He like suggests like shutting off water to farmers. Like
Yeah,
you
that's
don't get any
later.
more water. Yeah, the agriculture thing where he's like, oh yeah, but the people that make all the fucking food,
Yep.
let's just not give them water to make food with.
And again, it's like the ultimate opposite. It's the fascism. It's like you are the tiny elite who feels you know better than for the people who live on the land or something like that. You know better, and that you need to take this control and do it for them.
And also like just this weird idea, like, because I'm just trying to think about this where he says like, you're gonna go home and take a shower, and it wouldn't make a difference anyway. It's like, no, like would 5% reduction, like let's say like Salt Lake City, as citizens were able to lower their average per capita use by 5%. I think that would be probably a big deal, and that would be crazy, would it? Like, I think it wouldn't be that hard for people to modify their behavior to get modest goal like that. Like,
Yeah.
it's just not that crazy because it's happened before. People have done it.
They can modify it back, but then there's going to be other answers. Like, I think I'm going to skip over it, but he mentions like they have this idea of a pipeline to pump water back in. He just says no. He doesn't give a reason. He just says no.
It can't be done. Yeah, I heard that. I'm like, what do you mean?
And later they say that the church should buy that pipeline.
Yeah, and then he says, well, they won't do it. They won't do anything because that's what I'm skipping there is because
We should
John
have done it 10 years ago.
Glen mentions that they tried to beautify downtown Salt Lake, and then Larson says they only did that for their own needs and their own benefits. It's classic NIMBYism. They didn't want to do anything. And so then I cut to this Stossel clip.
They can't justify it. At least they never have. I can only call the church by what it's been doing.
Under capitalism, that applies to every transaction because capitalism, unlike socialism, is voluntary.
Like a pretzel.
We see this every time we buy something. The seller's there for his own self-interest, and so am I. So why do we both say, thank you?
Thank you.
Because he wanted the dollar more than he wanted the pretzel. I wanted the pretzel more than the dollar. The transaction doesn't happen unless both of us think we win. And that
we have too many.
And so he's lamenting that the church won't do anything unless they get a benefit out of it. Well, I can see a ton of ways that the church might benefit out of Salt Lake being just the same way that they did downtown Salt Lake. And he says all they did was suck that money out. No. And that I have a clip later from Michael Shellenberger, who is at the forefront of trying to help San Francisco. He's running for mayor there. He might get elected and win. And he's a former environmentalist who then came out as a critic of environmentalism. And he's been helping the homeless population there. And he says you have to, the real honest truth of it, he says this Foucault crap, he's one of the guys we brought up on Streeter's episode, Jared. He says this Foucault crap is the reason why Chesed Boudin, and even here in Salt Lake, Sil Gim does the same stuff as they think that we're going to not put these guys in prison or anything like that. And he says the actual answer to this stuff is the 3 Ps. We need more police, we need more psychiatry, and we need more parole officers. And that's how you do it. But then he says, there's also another thing. You need to beautify the city. That is an actual way. You need to stay on top of beautifying the city. It's that old concept of, you ever heard of like the broken glass theory?
Who is this you're talking about?
Michael Shellenberger.
Okay, I'm just going to pull up a tab. That's all I need.
I can jump right to it. Let's see.
So, well, first I was going to mention, this is sort of what happens when you go down the hell spiral that is what I call nihilistic altruism. And it's like where you realize at some point in your life that there's really no good deed you can do that doesn't in some way benefit yourself. And so if you're only looking, like if you want to criticize somebody because he only did that because it was good for himself, well, good luck finding somebody who does something, like even if it appears detrimental, you can take it to the next level and say, well, he only made it appear detrimental so that he could feel good about himself for having done a good deed for not him. So it's impossible to like they act like this whole thing where anytime you're out for your own self-interest, you're a selfish person or whatever. Well, maybe, but that's just how people are.
It's how people are, but then capitalism figured out how to make it beneficial and useful for the most amount of people. And socialism fails at it. Socialism causes more waste and it never actually benefits the most amount of people. Plus,
but in capitalism,
it's involuntary.
In capitalism, it benefits you to be the one that makes it benefit the most amount of people because that maximizes your capital.
So I have a bunch of the stuff at the end because maybe we could clip over it. But I mean, you guys are saying the points, but there's other famous people who are ex-environmentalists. Every single one of these guys are ex-extreme environmentalists. They're ex-people who spent more time in Greenpeace or more time in these other things than John Larson ever did, just going and getting some farm in Oregon or whatever. But Michael Shellenberger has this TED Talk. They actually put it on TED Talk about why renewables can't save the planet. They don't work and they cause more waste. We'll skip over that one. But this is what he said about the homeless population.
Very much.
And he was critical, and he's part of one of the main persons who helped get rid of Chesa Boudin there. And Chesa Boudin was causing that problem, and all the people hated him because they were putting just people back out in the streets.
So I point out, you don't have to choose between mass homelessness and mass incarceration, but that means that you need the 3 key Ps: more police, more psychiatry, and more probation. So that is for sure part of this agenda. I think the other part of it that's not appreciated is that you need more development. When you visit Skid Row, so I've been in Northern California since 1993. When I went to Skid Row, I was like, this neighborhood is awesome. I mean, if you ignore the complete human depravity and tragedy on the ground.
Real estate?
Yeah, you look around the buildings and like it's sunny and it's near the highways and you're like, this is an incredible neighborhood. It needs to be redeveloped. It needs
me to talk about this because I have been.
So that's just one of the points of saying that, yes, so the Mormon church, that's in their benefit. If it benefits the church, it can absolutely benefit the church and help that situation. And Sim Gill is one of the major problems because he runs the same concept that Chesa Boudin ran in San Francisco. My younger brother, who is a parole officer in Salt Lake, they all know who the problem is. They all know it's the same leftist idiot, stupid ideas of how to police people is part of what's causing that problem. It's not the Mormon church being unfair to those guys.
It's that dumb old trope of like, we live in a society. It's like, does John Larson really not understand that as much as we might disagree with or have different opinions than the church, like they are part of society, and so therefore things that are good for society are going to be good for the church. And in Salt Lake City, they're a big part of society. So things that are good for church are going to be good for everybody. Like there's some, to borrow the phrase, the trickle down there, like it's good for everybody. Like it's again, like it's like he lives in this cartoonish world where the church is just completely blocked off in their little world, and that downtown Salt Lake City isn't mostly non-Mormon. Like Salt Lake City proper is like under 30% Mormon at this point. And it's not like the church is like, well, I guess we're going to pull up stakes. Fuck all y'alls. No, they don't care.
Okay, so we'll get to the grand finale. So a couple of those other clips that I had at the end, there's that guy, Alex Epstein. He's another one who talks about the natural use of natural gases and how these knuckleheads never look at the triage. They only look at what the negative effect something has, and they cannot look at the positive effect, like how many lives natural gas has saved, which is infinitely exponentially more than who've died from it. And another thing that they point out is that people dying from natural disasters has decreased. It's now down around 300 a year, whereas it was in the thousands in the early 1900s, well in the tens of thousands every single year dying from natural disasters. They point out that increasing the wealth of a nation, the wealth of people, is one of the easiest ways for them to survive catastrophic situations. And one of the ways that you increase the wealth of the nation still is using natural gas. And these guys have these hallucinating ideas, but they cannot look at something and say, oh, because we affect something on this planet in any way, shape, or form, because we exist, we can't look at any of the positives. We can't look at the positives of agriculture. We can only look at the negatives. It costs water, but yeah, you fed 2 million people. Yeah, but it costs some water, And
I want to know how the doctrine of punching up and punching down plays into all this environmentalism, because. Can like a rich person, is Stephen Colbert telling everybody to buy a Tesla? Is that
they all do
punching
that stuff?
down?
Yeah.
I mean, how does that not count as punching down if you're telling somebody who's poor to go out and spend $30,000 on a new car?
Well, then they all have that hierarchy stuff. They don't have to follow all these rules because they're part of the important hierarchy.
No, you can do any amount of word games that you want in order to put yourself lower on the hierarchy. I understand that's the game.
That was just because going all the way back, though, it was like the second episode of South Park ever, is that they ripped into Barbra Streisand because she told everybody else that they needed to just turn off their air conditioners and be hot when she has 5 homes.
Yeah.
Hey, I got to go in like 5 minutes, but
Well, we're getting to the rant. Here's the rant. So this might be a good grand finale. So although he
rant.
just says a couple dumb things after the rant too, but we'll just let this roll.
There's a comment by Exmo Marine that says, and John Larson, you won't spend your money to fix this problem either. All right. Tell me where I spend my money, Mr. Exmo. Tell me what I do with my time. Tell me what I'm doing in fucking Oregon. I spend almost all of my free time and money working on this problem because we are fucked to a degree that most people can't wrap their head around.
Yeah, this is the moment that I don't like to armchair diagnose like others do, but this is the part to me. It goes so much from like laughing to crying to laughing to crying that I go, man, that's your.
He's 100% emotion and has been for a while, and it seems like he's losing it.
Yeah, this is sad.
And I spend almost all of my free time and energy working on the climate change problem. And I'm working on a micro scale, trying to find cultivar. The number of pathogens that have been introduced into every growing climate in the last 10 years is off the scale. Insects are dying, birds are dying, pollinators are going, plants can no longer take this thing. There is work that is being done on the ground level. There are less fortunate populations that I spend money and time with. I do everything I possibly can. And I'm not saying that to say I'm better than you, but what I'm saying is that you fucking conservatives tell yourself stories. You know nothing about how I spend money. You know nothing about how I spend my time. Yet you're willing to come on the internet and post this comment about what I do. Come out here. You spend the evening with me and see what I do. Because this world is crashing right now. And I don't want to be the one to say this, but climate change, we are in Act fucking 1. Did you see all the cattle that died in Kansas City? Every fucking day, people are dying from climate change right now. And
I have some stuff saying that some people say that stuff happens and has happened all the time because it can happen because of a heat wave, and there was nothing extreme or different about the heat or something like that. But
well, as we've seen, these states are having more over 90-degree days than ever before.
Yeah.
Let themselves be burned alive before they actually do something. And my guess is it's going to take some kind of event where between 50,000 and 100,000 people, white people, let's be clear, 50 and 100,000 white people all die in an event before people will take change.
He's such a dipshit.
What event would kill 50,000 white people?
It is here now. It's not future. There's no question if it's here. We are in it, and we are all causing it. And we all have to drive our cars less. We all have to consume less. We have to use less water. Every one of us, not to put water in the Great Salt Lake, because you got to learn to live on less water, because there is going to be less water. And the problem, the frustration, is the church, who has been telling us that they are our leaders, that they are entitled to revelation, that they know what's going on, that we should look to them, are doing nothing. They're not addressing this problem. They're cashing checks, right? So don't tell me that I'm not doing anything when you don't even know what the fuck you're talking about. Find the people who are doing things and work with them. Go down to the homeless shelters. Don't think everybody is the same hypocritical, nonsensical. I'll settle down.
Don't.
This is real and it's important. This planet is dying. And one of the things that I do, I'll say this, is I volunteer with the local university.
No, the planet is not dying. This is one of the things that they're always saying. Like going up a degree or something like that is not dying. There will be adjustments that have to be made, but the planet will live on.
Insect populations and plant populations and native species and all that kind of stuff. I spend my time every week working on this, and you cannot comprehend the scope and scale of the problem that we're facing. It is enormous. And it is impacting.
You do not understand it, John Larson. You don't understand how big and wide and far it is and what might change or not change. Because no one individual does. It's too big of a system of too many variables. You'll cock your head up and scream experts and your face will turn red. But
element of our lives. We have shortages of fucking baby formula right now. We know there's short.
That's not climate change. Guess what caused that? Guess what caused that? Central planning caused that. Regulation caused that. Government pushing all of it was WIC. WIC made it so that we had only 3 different places because of the WIC contracts buying up most of all of the stuff, the baby formula in the world. They insisted on everything being bought through 1 or 2 different baby formula companies, and one gets shut down. So there couldn't ever be any natural competition in that. Then there's regulations from the FDA about what sort of ingredients and all that stuff. And you couldn't even ship stuff over from Europe because of tariffs and stuff like that. It was a central planning thing. Global warming.
They had a rule that says that European baby food doesn't meet American safety standards.
And the reason we were down to 1 or 2 factories was because of bottlenecking from regulations and dipshit central planners. Cock your head back and say global warming to every problem in the world.
Are coming down the line. We are not looking at future disaster. Disaster is here, and it's just that you all, or who don't agree with me, have the fucking privilege to live in a place where you can push.
Anyone who doesn't agree with them has the privilege.
Disaster is here. I got up this morning. I went and walked a dog for my neighbor. I got lunch. I recorded this podcast. Like, disaster's here.
But this
he's
is
not even talking about. He's not even talking about climate change right now, though. Like he's just grasping. He's desperately grasping at anything he possibly can that would be altruistic. Because he's like, I'm not spending my time. I'm spending my time. I'm doing the work on the floor. Go out to a homeless shelter. I'm like, what does that have to do with climate change, man?
Yeah, he's upset because he got his purity got called into question. My biggest problem with all this stuff is all these guys they leave a religion and they find another religion. That's our ultimate point of all this stuff. Is there's more church, and he's doing more church, and he's gotten upset just like somebody inside a church used to get upset when they got called out on not having a testimony or something like that.
I'm going to become like the greatest missionary for Christianity ever because I'm like I'm like a Christian nihilist at this point because I'm like I think everybody in the world is religious and just give them a decent one.
they just choose one that's the least stupid because these ones that are based in scientism and all that stuff end up being just as stupid as any other one. And your stupid religion, Larson, is as stupid as anyone I've ever seen.
The other thing is because like the Jains they've done more to become like what I think John would envision as a perfect way to live as anybody else.
Gelled and unified with nature.
Yeah, because like, have you ever heard of the Jains, Jared?
Yeah,
it's an Indian religion, but yeah, and like because their whole thing is no destruction, no violence, and the thing that cracks me up is like the most serious Jains, like this isn't regular Jains, but the ones that feel like they're closest to breaking out of the cycle. One of the rules is like not only can you not eat no meat, you can't eat anything that kills the plant to harvest it. So no tubers, no onions, no garlic. But then on top of that, the most serious Jains, you can only eat something if it was given to you but not prepared for you.
Holy God. Yeah, that's the nihilistic altruism.
Yeah, there it is. No, that's it. Because okay, I mean, maybe there's something there, but there's no civilization. Like, I don't know, maybe maybe there's personal salvation, but there's no civilization there.
There's probably literal death.
The thing that's part of what you're saying. No civilization is part of the problem. Is these types of screamers and criers could always cry whenever civilization gets big enough. I mean, that's really where Rousseau comes from, and Rousseau is the leader of all these ideas of decrying civilization happening. And I think climate change, in a strange way, as much as sometimes there's truth in it, it also was the necessary logical conclusion for these people to go to say that capitalism had something that we need to freak out about in it. It also is a perfect angle to attack the thing that's just this big kind of satanic thing that can't ever be dealt with, and we have the answers for it, even though we don't really have the answers for it. But going all the way back to Rousseau, I mean, that's why they say you have Hobbes who says civilization, you need civilization, and Rousseau who says civilization is bad. Peterson will say I'm half Hobbes, half Rousseau. I mean, you got to work a little bit with both of them, but Rousseau and any sort of person who followed Rousseau, which was Hegel and the whole Hegelian line, because Hegel really goes back to Rousseau, is just endlessly finding some sort of reason to chirp and say why civilization is bad and evil and we need to be in charge of it. And climate change just became the perfect little area to do that. And of course we know, and people are saying, they're saying right now, watch out for Biden declaring a national emergency for climate change, because it will be the ultimate card to pull out to say we just now have unilateral control and can trump all systems of government because we just declared eternal emergency.
In order to save the dum-dums from themselves, we're going to have to take control.
And that's another huge thing that you see in fascism, going all the way back to Hitler and the Nazis, that they would declare states of emergency for total control. And
that's another Animal Farm reference. There is when the pigs are trying to convince everybody else that, okay, yeah, we don't vote anymore. It's the way they do it is by saying, yeah, you might want your freedom, but sometimes you'll choose dumb things with it. So we can't give you that freedom.
Yep.
That down.
There's one more minute of rant.
I was reading some notes 12 years ago. I wrote that there were 5 cities in the United States that were currently under evacuation for climate change. They're sinking. Miami, it floods on clear days in Miami right
currently
now.
Under evacuation.
We will be way far down the line before we start taking real action. So the only action to be taken, in my mind, because it has to be done by these organizations like the church, like the people pulling the strings of capitalism, to completely change and dismantle their own systems. But
there it is, woke. Remember we said the word the only answer
dismantle the
is
systems.
we got to get this critical consciousness, see how capitalism was a problem, and dismantle the systems of capitalism to find an answer out. And we don't have any answers except dismantle. That's our answer. Our answer is dismantle, and that won't cause any death.
You can work on is building your own community resilience, finding other people, finding local sources for food, grow your own food.
Like religions do, like little, Jainism type religions do. Is that what you're saying, John freaking Larson?
What water will we use to grow our own food?
Use less gasoline, use less everything, because we
Just stay inside of your city apartment and order restaurants.
are in for it. And people my age will be inconvenienced, will be hot, will be whatever. Our kids and our grandkids, they are fucked. And if you just want to sit around and drink wine, whatever, go do it. I don't give a shit. But stay out of my feed.
That's the end of it. Stay out of my feed. Yeah. That's we know you always end up saying that, Larson. So
Where is his advocacy for nuclear power?
No, that was some of the other clips that I have, is that they all advocate against nuclear power and they all freak out.
They do? I didn't actually see that part.
All environmentalists, all the
environmentalists in general.
I've
these
been
types of
noticing more and more
environmentalists
of
are
the-
anti-nuclear power.
Sure, but I've been noticing more and more of the lefties kind of come around to nuclear power.
Yeah, that's good because they should. But that's Michael Shellenberger, his TED Talk, the end of it says renewables aren't going to work. You actually have to look at
Because I feel like the argument I feel like the argument we should be having in regard to renewables right now is uranium versus thorium. That would be a fun argument to have, but why would they not advocate it? How come he's all data driven and shit like that?
Because
it was an emotional response. There was two things happened in the same summer: 3 Mile Island and the movie The China Syndrome. No, because 3 Mile Island I think was 77, 78, something like that. But those two things happened in one summer, and all of the political will in America just disappeared as far as nuclear was concerned. And since then, the whole conversation has been dominated by the activists.
Yeah,
and because it is a tough sell because it's a big scary thing, but
maybe if you want to stick around, Jared, I can go through with them because if Flip has to go. But there's some of those other ones. But Patrick, well, there's a couple other things I might want to hear, but although we already covered them, but Patrick Moore talks about how the whole entire Greenpeace movement got hijacked by the left. He calls them like watermelons that are green on the outside and red on the inside. And there's this whole movement. That Bjorn Shellenberger guy, he talks about how none of them are actual economists. None of them can do or will do a cost benefit thing. They won't go into that because it gets all on a religious level of stuff. They've just taken things on a religious level and not thinking about, well, maybe let's put this thing second and put this thing first and put more money into this thing and put more money into that. And all those guys are ex-environmentalists because they got sick of the hijacked left emotional psychopaths who just say, no, it's just got to be this way, and get freaked out about things like nuclear power and just based off of kind of like a religious knee-jerk reaction to it. Say, we can't have nuclear power because it doesn't sound natural. That's what it is. It doesn't sound natural. That's all it is. And it's the answer. It's the actual answer. Patrick Moore, he's the ex-Greenpeace leader. He was the director of Greenpeace, and he left it. And one of the things he talks about is these people talking about toxicology stuff. Maybe to be like somebody who fights for saving the whales, you don't need a degree. But if you're talking about the toxicology stuff, you better know your stuff. And none of them know their stuff at all. And he talks about that. He was on Chris Williamson just this last week. You can listen to his whole hour. It's a good hour. And Shellenberger's been talking a lot. He's got a few books talking about all the renewable crap and how it's bull crap and how they're still freaked out about nuclear energy. And when it's just the easy answer if you actually worry about the bigger environment. The fourth generation.
The great irony was that everybody says, "Oh, nuclear power is too dangerous. A nuclear accident could be a civilization-threatening event." But it turns out that burning fossil fuels is apparently a civilization-threatening thing. So what are we going to do?
And they've gotten so much better at the safety level. Like the fourth reactors are insane.
The fears the fears are totally the stuff is serious, but it's not what people think it is.
So like those guys say, they've made it like a religion, and maybe I'll show you those clips if you have time, Jared. Or I'll forward them to you, or we'll watch them after Flip. But the last couple things are we have that little clip that we already mentioned where they say beware dichotomies. You want to hear it? And the first Carah says all of ex-Mormonism is rooted in being against injustice. That's what.
That one. That's a classic.
Oh shit! I didn't even see that.
So John Larson, I also just really appreciate and Carah,
in the right spot.
The very instinct that makes you an ex-Mormon is usually rooted in injustice, right? And so, John,
I remember that.
brought up,
The
like,
very
environmentalism,
instinct that
and
makes
there's
you.
one aspect of mine,
No,
like,
the instinct that made me ex-Mormon is that I stopped believing in God.
people in certain locations deserve to get.
You go ahead, because I'm just getting to the next spot.
Well, there's some lesser reasons as far as the woke ex-Mormons go. There are lesser reasons for leaving Mormonism because like they actually have lately been starting to sort of chastise the as Kate Kelly puts it, more male-centric reasons for leaving Mormonism, which is stuff like the historical evidence and things like that, and anachronisms and all that stuff. And that's what did it for me. The Book of Abraham, that seems pretty damning. That's really difficult to get around, but that's not really an injustice thing. That's like, oh, I just don't think it's right in the things.
Carah's tipping her hand that it was always an emotional thing for her, that it's never really been intellectual. It's only ever been emotional and about finger wagging, moralizing.
Yeah. This whole last little bit is just tipping their hands. I mean, here's Larson saying that other
the
part.
fact that people want to bifurcate, it's the problem of our political discourse that we're unable to see the truths because we have this dichotomy of conservative versus liberal. And everybody's like saying, you guys are conservative, you guys are liberals, blah, 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 blah. The world is much more complicated than that. And it doesn't, whenever anybody's telling you a dichotomy, run away. It's not true.
It's so painful, man. It's seriously so painful.
So great.
And this is the last thing for Flip, is this last little bit.
Parts, and live those parts. The church has a lot of great things, but they come from Mormons who are great people. Who care? We have to abandon these ideas that we have to stick it to the libtards, or that the conservatives are all morons, or whatever. We have to recognize that we're all stupid, and we're all humans, and really start taking care of each other. We have to bring back Christianity.
Whoa.
And we can reform the church now, but it has to have people who will reach out and take the risk. There were the people who came before me who were kicked out of the church and were darkened, who wrote books and they wrote blogs. And then there were people my generation who came out and said, no, I'm leaving. I'm out. What we need is the next generation that will say, I'm staying, but fuck all your bullshit. We're done with temples. We're done with ordinances. We are going to live the gospel as defined by Jesus Christ.
Vive la revolution!
the liberation theology. We got to stay and take it over, and that's something I've been warning. It's when I was first on the Midnight Mormons, I was telling them. They say, "Well, we got to base in Jesus," and they say, "Well, what if they take over Jesus?" And I told them that, and Quaker said, "Well, you're blowing my mind here." But that's what they've been doing. It's what they've been doing for a long while, saying we're gonna call you racist until we own you, like James Lindsay says about critical race theory. But it's just one of many different angles of saying we're gonna use our wokeness, our critical social justice, and our critical of capitalism, and our critical of you, critical of all old things, until we own it, and until we dismantle it and we run it. And this is just them tipping their hand to that ultimate motive that I've been saying that they've had since we started doing this.
During that whole rant, my brain just automatically started my brain supplied the soundtrack to that rant, and it was the music to the Spirit of God. The spirit of woke like a fire is burnt. Like that's what he's doing there.
You're doing wokeness, you're doing religion. The end. We proved it once again. I gotta
blast off.
All right, later. You want to catch a couple of these, Jared, or you want to call it?
That's fine.
So these are just the ones I pulled together.
Shared, that was the initial article announcing the book, saying this contains misleading and false information. It's not true. It didn't contain a single piece of false information. And misleading is a really subjective thing, right?
What did you say that they objected to?
The main issues were, I point out that we're not in the midst of a mass extinction. A mass extinction is when 75 or 90% of all species on Earth are extinct or going extinct. In fact,
look, I like how they have the
endangered, and most of them should or will survive.
Warning.
The other one is I pointed out that natural disasters are not getting worse. Deaths from natural disasters have declined over 90% over the last 100 years. We're just much better at dealing with hurricanes and floods and non-climate related disasters like earthquakes as well. And so what they respond, that on the disasters, they point out that there's some evidence that hurricanes are becoming somewhat more intense, but then they leave out the fact that the best available science predicts that hurricanes will become 25% less frequent, but 5% more intense, North Atlantic hurricanes. But even that doesn't matter because we're just so much better at preparing for hurricanes. So like vanishingly few people die. I think something like in the most recent, 2019, something like 400 Americans died of natural disasters, right? It's like 300, because there's like 300 times more people died of drug deaths in the United States than from natural disasters. I mean, this is how these two parts work together.
Is too much.
That's the Fauci thing. That's from the very start of the coup. When they talked about doing this stuff, I said, you guys are doing crap triage. Like, you think that sure, you're right. We could all hide in a bubble for 3 years and save people from dying of the coup. And then we'd all die in the bubbles. Like you guys just have this one-track mind for your one thing to save, and you don't care whatever other damage you cause in that process.
Well, I think that taking it down to zero risk is doable or even desirable.
Mm-hmm.
As someone that considers myself liberal or moderate, I used to be progressive. I don't use that label anymore. But my view is the drug crisis is objectively a much bigger threat to human life and to civilization than climate.
And that's one of the things Peterson's brought out a bunch of these things that he's talking about when he went over it at the UN and all that stuff, is they just find out it's just way down the list behind other things. And there was this thing a while back where Shapiro talked about, they're talking about rising sea lines, which everybody's always questioned because all those people like Obama pushing it, going by shoreline houses and all that stuff right after they pushed the climate change stuff, Al Gore too. But they say that this stuff's going to happen, and Shapiro says people are just going to buy different houses. They're not, your house isn't going to flood. It's a slow moving catastrophe, and people try to sneer Shapiro for how he worded it. But Shapiro is right. Those houses, if that shoreline water really is going to rise in 100 years, that's a slow moving catastrophe. It's like the Austin Powers scene where the guy's standing there and the slow moving tractor comes and runs him over. It's not a thing where, I mean, the shorelines have moved on this planet ever since this planet has existed. And you can find civilizations that existed that are in the water already since long ago, will move when the shorelines move. That's what humans do. But people talk about it like it's going to happen tomorrow. Suddenly that shoreline is going to be 10 feet up. No, it's going to happen over 100 years. And the house that you're in will probably dilapidate over 30 years anyway.
Well, I've seen a couple people go over exactly what would happen, the disasters that would happen if we just got rid of like coal. Like if we stopped using coal or fossil fuels, just the absolute like death that would happen. And I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I gotta.
Yeah, it'd be crazy that they don't do the triage of that stuff, and especially in the third world. Like if they got their way with everything, so many people would die just from heat waves and that sort of stuff. Victor Davis Hanson has one called the Two Californias, and he talks about how it's like there's a third world California and a super first world California, and he talks about how these idiots like put these regulations in that raise the cost and price of cooling. And so you can go to these areas of California where all these different people go to Walmart in the middle of the day and hang out in the middle of Walmart just for the AC. They think they're saving the planet though, and they're going to help save lives or something like that. In those heat waves, massive amount, like the same way they count coof deaths, you could already count heat wave deaths just for your stupid ideas of raising prices on cooling,
That is, did we already miss the part where Larson claims that we, by all metrics, have undercounted COVID deaths?
Yeah, we put it in there. It was there. It was right before the Tony Heller quit.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, no, wait. Maybe, no, not COVID deaths. No, maybe I didn't put that one. I have it in there. Oh, I'll see if I can find it. Let's listen to this for a longer second.
Climate change. Like we're adapted really well to climate change. We should do something about it. It's real. There are risks associated with it, but like there's no scenario in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of climate change killing 93,000 Americans a year. In fact, there's no scenario of it killing, of it increasing deaths from natural disasters. I think that people still care about nature enough for these facts to matter. We saw last year in South Korea, a citizens jury deliberated for several months weighing these different issues. They had to decide whether they were going to phase out nuclear or keep it and expand it. They started out 40% in favor of expanding nuclear, but after several months and considering these issues, they ended up voting 60% to expand nuclear. A similar phenomenon just happened last week in Arizona. The voters had a ballot initiative to vote on whether or not to continue with nuclear or to phase it out and try to replace it with natural gas and solar. They ended up rejecting it 70-30. And even here in Europe, we saw the Netherlands is one of the first countries in recent memory to actually...
The detail of this one, because I only clipped a little part of it, but the detail of like how crap the solar and the wind ideas are, and how, just like electric cars, like how much they don't actually save anything and cost just as much carbon footprint as anything you'll ever come across.
One of my favorite little tidbits is like realizing that they actually have to change laws of how many birds you're allowed to kill.
Yeah,
based on those damn turbines, because they just kill birds all the time.
How much have you seen? Like how much natural gas like it costs to create and keep them running?
Oh yeah, they're crazy inefficient. Like
the thing about all this stuff, it's so hard because people call you climate change denier or whatever. You say, well, I'm not. It could all be happening, whatever. I just believe that these central planning idiots who claim they have the answers just do not and don't and never will. You gotta have an actual decentralized answer to it. But.
Well, the fact that they don't, I don't know. I double down on the whole nuclear thing. The fact that more of them aren't going for that shows that they don't really.
That should be issue number one. Yeah, if they took care of that issue, if across the world they say, okay, we're doing that, we could then trickle down to second issues. But if they're not going to just start with that one, it's just like, shut up,
Announce, as they did last week, that they're going to start to increase their reliance on nuclear power in recognition that there's just no way they could generate significant amounts of energy enough from solar and wind to meet their climate targets.
And there was such a stupid stuff. I don't know if you saw the thing like Germany. Trump warned them that they were going to be dependent on Russian oil and all that stuff. And Germany just said, ugh, and people like scoffed at Trump for it. And then it just happened. And they shut down all their nuclear plants.
Oh, God.
And Trump was warning them all about it. And then they just barely had a thing where just last week, Russia cut off their oil and now they're in a state of emergency. It's just so stupid.
I think it's natural that those of us that became very concerned about climate change, such a big environmental issue, would gravitate towards really romantic solutions like harmonizing human civilization with.
That's the problem, is the romantic. So anything that sounds techie or technical freaks out the Extinction Rebellion type people, and nuclear sounds techie and technical.
The natural world using renewable energies. But I think it's also understandable that as the facts have come in, that many of us have started to question our prior beliefs and change our minds. For me, the question now is, now that we know that renewables can't save the planet, are we going to keep letting them destroy it? Thank you very much.
I think you're right. We missed the code. I'm going to hit that code thing because I had some other.
Who died of COVID in the United States, and by all accounts, we're undercounting those numbers.
Have that clip. No, by all accounts, we are overcounting those numbers, John Larson. Even the CDC admitted it.
I know that's the craziest part. I haven't seen anybody admit. People are so weird with this COVID stuff. I run into people still like at Walmart who work there, who are wearing like, you don't have to wear a mask to work there, but obviously you can. And they're wearing like the neck gaiters.
Oh my
and I was like, are you high? Are you not paying attention to anything? Like, look, if you're still wearing a mask at all, it's because you're afraid of COVID, which is fine. Wear your mask if you want. But like even the CDC, they came out and said that things like neck gaiters and kerchiefs are little more than facial decorations. Anything short of an N95 mask, they said. So if you're still listening to it, why would you be wearing a neck gaiter? Like, wear the N95 mask.
Somebody cocked their head back and yelled science at them, and they believed it.
Yeah, I guess.
And what we can see is that the death rate from these things, so storms, flood, extreme heat, extreme cold, wildfire, has gone down by a rate of 98%. Now, you would think, of course, it's gotten much worse, which is what I thought. Even though I was suspicious of the environmental movement, I thought for sure it's at least gotten worse, but it's gotten way better. And when you start to think about it, it makes sense because what we're talking about in terms of a side effect is one.
When I do the screen recordings, it gets off with the mouth and the thing, but anyway.
Degree of warming Celsius over 100 plus years. And human beings are incredibly adaptable. And by the way, far more people die of cold than of heat. So if you just think about it clinically and you don't have this hatred of human impact, it's not that scary for the overall temperatures to rise by an average of 1 degree. But
is it going too fast?
It's a little fast.
I think I had it already sped up when I recorded it.
At the same time, what has happened in terms of our ability to adapt to, or as I call it, master climate? There's been a revolution. So we can now make ourselves warm when it's freezing cold. We can make ourselves cool when it's really hot. We can do irrigation, which is maybe the most underrated thing because that helps with drought-related death, which is historically the worst climate-related killer, and on and on and on. You can point to all kinds of ways in which amazing machines make us incredibly safe from climate. And those machines are powered by fossil fuels, which provide 80% of the world's energy. And as we'll talk about in comparison to the alternatives, for very good reasons. We're not just using them because of bias. We're using them because they are actually they're more cost-effective than the alternative. So the fact is that fossil fuels have taken a naturally dangerous climate and made it unnaturally safe. And anyone who's making predictions about the future.
So he seems to be advocating for innovation, right? And if I could think of some sort of an economic system that encouraged people with like capital or something like that to innovate for their own profit, maybe that economic system would have some sort of a solution to things.
Maybe some central planners could invent that.
Maybe.
Needs to start there. And it's very notable that our whole establishment acts like fossil fuels have already made climate a disaster, which to me proves that, again, which means their goal is not.
There are only so many people alive on this planet, which of course Extinction Rebellion people will freak out about that overpopulation. But because of natural gases is the only reason why we've conquered the environment so much already as we have.
Let's put it this way. How you measure good and bad ultimately is determined by what is your goal. And I think their goal with respect to the world is not to advance human life, or as I call it, human flourishing on Earth. Because if that's your goal, we're far better. The climate livability is far better. But if your goal is to eliminate human impact on Earth, and you just think man-made climate change is intrinsically immoral because it violates your primitive anti-human religion, then you think it's a catastrophe. So the only justification for claiming catastrophe today, when we have unprecedented livability, is this anti-human, anti-impact perspective.
You stress throughout the book the need to do a full cost-benefit analysis of different energy regimes and that this tends to never happen because analysts and media use either explicitly or implicitly what you call an anti-impact framework. What is that, and how does that skew the discussion? And what should we be on the lookout for when we're talking about this question of like, okay, how do we replace energy with?
It's like Larson's, all of his stuff is just stop impacting the environment at all. You know, that's to me, that's the only real thing I could glean from anything he's saying. We need to stop impacting the environment at all. So he's already advocating that we should just not be living around Salt Lake in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I know. What else could he possibly say? He's basically saying that it's already over. We're already fucked.
Yeah, there's no answer in his thing except for stop impacting environment in any way. And there's no way as a human to not do that.
Something, that's different than fossil fuel.
So just to give context to the anti-impact framework, the observations that lead to this need to have an explanation is we tend to ignore the benefits of fossil fuels and then what I call catastrophize the side effects. In chapters 1 and 2, I try to document this very thoroughly, but just a quick example is with agriculture. We tend to ignore, like I give the example of Michael Mann, one of the world's thought leaders on these issues, and he has a whole book.
Tony Heller's always ripped on Michael Mann. He is one of the guy lies, and he lies left and right, and he's kind of one of the heroes of the whole entire environmental movement. Just same with that Ehrlich guy. And he never gets called to the carpet in the ways that he was wrong, or the way that he's even been caught going back and fudging old data and stuff like that.
On climate and energy. And he doesn't once mention the fact that agriculture is totally dependent on fossil fuels, and fossil fuels are really feeding 8 billion people via diesel-powered equipment and via natural gas-derived fertilizer. So my view is this is just an intellectual crime. That's the same as if you're evaluating a polio vaccine and you don't talk about the fact that it stops polio, and you just talk about negative side effects. And so part of what I'm trying to get at is
that's really what it is.
Yeah, it is.
They don't.
Well, that's how is it? It's Thomas Sowell, isn't it? Where he talks about there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs.
Yeah,
I was just watching that thing where he talked about that. The polio vaccine, it wasn't a solution to polio; it was a trade-off because it saved all these people from getting polio. But 1 in every however many kids got brain damage from the polio vaccine or something like that. Like it's a trade-off, and I think they sort of assume that there exists a solution that involves nothing negative at all.
Yeah, and they won't accept any of that unless it has that, and they refuse to acknowledge any trade-off. Alarmists refuse to acknowledge that natural gas is are helping save lives of millions in the third world as they go growing in size. And
do our leaders do this, particularly the ones who know better? And my answer is they can't be fully pro-human if they are ignoring these huge human benefits of fossil fuels. And so one alternative explanation I offer, which I think is true for the leaders, not so much the followers, is that they don't really think of the benefits to human life as benefits because their focus is eliminating human impact on Earth. And if your focus is eliminating human impact on Earth, you have a hostility toward energy in general because it leads to this high impact industrial civilization. And you're going to have an over hostility toward things like side effects. So my argument with CO2 is CO2 impacts climate. But the idea that it's world ending is not at all justifiable from a human perspective. But if your goal is to eliminate our impact and you think the perfect world is the one that we haven't impacted at all, it is a tragedy. It is a catastrophe because you think impact is evil. And then the other element of what I call this anti-impact framework. So number 1 is human impact is evil and our goal should be to eliminate it. And number 2, and this makes it seem practical, is that it's inevitably self-destructive. So it's wrong for us to put more CO2 in the atmosphere. And if we keep doing it, nature is going to punish us. And you see a lot of this with the global warming stuff. It's not just this is going to be a challenge making the world more tropical. We'll have to adapt. It's the world is going to end. And so I do consider it very much a primitive and anti-human religion because it really has this one commandment, thou shalt not impact nature. And then if you violate the commandment, the God punishes you and puts you in hell, which is really global warming / climate change.
And I think because all these guys are environmentalists and kind of freak out alarmist side of it, and they all kind of get better at talking about real and honest answers. This guy did it with Jordan Peterson, and they talk with economists and think about it as a cost benefit analysis, that sort of deal, which those other people don't do. They have only this religious precept of zero impact. It's anti-human. It's an anti-human view of the whole situation.
I feel like these isms always get bastardized by anyone. Maybe that's just a function of being a human being, is that anytime you develop like environmentalists, a bunch of dumbasses are going to come and bastardize it. The same happened to feminism and all that stuff. Because I remember one of the first times when I got this job, there was this guy, and he knew my dad, and he found out that I wasn't really LDS anymore, and so he really wanted to know. He wanted me to be like him. He was like the only lefty at work, and he was so you don't believe in God, do you? And I was like, I don't know. And then he was like, oh, so you're a closet atheist. It's like, well, what about are you politically liberal? And I was like, I mean, I'm like maybe classically liberal. And he's like, well, do you think gay marriage should be legal? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, well, you're a closet liberal atheist. And I was like, okay. He's like, what do you think about climate change? I was like, I don't know much about it. I don't know enough about it. I think I probably told you this story before. And he goes, but what do you have to know about it? 97% of scientists all agree that climate change is man-made. And I was like, that's a stupid thing you just said. I don't know anything about climate change. I know that is a stupid thing that you just said.
Although that's been tested. I won't go into the detail about that, but the way that they come up with those numbers is a bunch of bullshit too.
Oh no, I was like, because I went and studied it that night. I was like, I don't know much about climate change, but I know that claim is bullshit.
Yeah.
Most likely. I mean, and so I went and studied it, and yeah, it was absolute nonsense the way they gathered that data.
Well, I think because there's a stupid Mott and Bailey game with like the language of that too, because the bottom line is like living on an earth, the climate's going to change on it no matter what happens, no matter who's there. And it's like man-made climate change. Anything impacting the earth is going to impact things within it. But so once they changed the term to climate change, it almost became meaningless, you know? So the idea is like, well, what are you supposed to be afraid of? Because of course it's changing. I've watched all these documentaries recently and just how the glaciers formed the Great Lakes. That was a major climate change, you know? That all happened before humans though. Things are changing. We're on a changing planet. That's just all there is to it. So what are you guys even talking about? The whole idea with all this is that it is such a big and huge and difficult, complicated system that you cannot model. You can't model it well enough in computers. They'll be 10 times more wrong than those COVID models were that all said that we'd have 3% to 10% death. It's way more complicated than that model, going across 100 years from your predictions. It could, who knows? It could even be worse than what you're saying. But what I'm saying is you don't know any more than I don't know. No matter how much you sit there and John Larson anxiety study it every single night for 14 years. I don't care. You've read some things that somebody said, freak out about this, freak out about this, freak out about that. I don't think you know very much about the earth any more than people can predict what the weather is a month from now very well. You know?
Well, these again, he just doesn't point to anything very specific. Like the stuff with the Great Salt Lake that he was talking about was very specific, but the climate shit he's just so vague and ominous about. And these guys are all very specific with their
they're specific about we can start working on stuff. We can start. Well, let's listen to how this guy kind of frames it here. Although I recommend listening to the full hour that he does with Peterson
on infrastructure or on the many other solutions that are out there. And what we do is we simply work with lots of economists to take a look at what is the cost of a solution and how much good will that deliver, not just in terms of economics, that is, how much better off will we be or how less worse off will we be, but also how much better will we be off socially. That's typically people not dying, people not being sick, people not having to pay their doctors, not experiencing the loss of a loved one, and also environmentally, that's not so much relevant for tuberculosis, but of course when it comes to deforestation or loss of wetlands and the air pollution, indoor air pollution, and many of the other problems of the world also have an environmental component. We try to add up all of those, and so basically say, how much will this cost? How much good will it do when you incorporate all of these things and turn them into dollars? And then you can basically say for every dollar you spend, you do this much good of social benefit. And then we simply ask, if there are lots of solutions where you'll spend $1 and maybe do $1.50 of good for the world, that's nice. But there are some solutions where you can spend $1 and do hundreds of dollars of good. Shouldn't we focus on the hundreds of dollars first, the place where you make much more good for every resource you spend?
Sounds capitalistic to me.
Yep.
Was unfortunate, but it was caused by the fact that as we became more well-known and powerful and political, we were basically hijacked by the left in the end, who were more clever at politics than we were, as that was their game. And so I ended up being the only director of Greenpeace International during the last 6 years from 79 when we created Greenpeace International. And I was instrumental in the negotiations that brought that about. And until 86 when I left, I was the only director with any formal science education. And we were now dealing with toxic waste and issues of chemistry. And you don't need to be a PhD marine biologist to know to save the whales, or you don't need to be a nuclear physicist to want to stop hydrogen bombs. But if you're going to get into the issue of toxicology, and now where they're calling plastic toxic, right, and calling carbon dioxide toxic, which is complete BS, you've got to know some chemistry and you've got to understand toxicology. And
Envirom stuff?
No, it's simply a cult doomsday prediction, is what it is. They have absolutely no reason to say that. There's no
soil degradation.
What's that?
Oh, I didn't say anything.
Oh,
none of this.
Oh yeah, topsoil degradation. It's happening everywhere. No, our farming methods are so improved now that soil conservation is so improved now that we're not losing soil like they say. Soil will eventually go away, right? No, the soil is made by the bloody trees. That's how soil gets there.
For a long time, they were freaking out about carbon dioxide and saying that was a major causer of global warming. And the truth of it is, and this is one of the guys has pointed out, is that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there used to be way more of it, especially when things grew bigger back during the dinosaur eras. The carbon dioxide helps plants grow and grow bigger. And a lot of people are questioning on if it even like affects global warming. A lot of other people say it's the sun that actually causes global warming or not, how hot things are or not. And this whole entire movement of saying carbon dioxide in the air has major questions to it, but you will get one of these warnings at the bottom if you start questioning it all, if that carbon dioxide claim is real or not.
But no, it was water vapor, and that's what water vapor looks like when you backlight it.
So he's talking about, so Larson talked about all those things that come from the nuclear plants and the stuff that they're burning off. A lot of times what's coming out of the top of a nuclear plant that people are freaking out about, that smoke coming up, is water vapor. It's water going in the air. So he says, well, it pulls particulate, but it's water shooting in the air. It's not the old burning off coal steam. If it's burning coal, then it is, more disgusting. But like nuclear plants, it's water vapor that's coming out from up there.
So and the same with the inbreeding polar bears. I mean, they are just making up one story after another now and floating it in the media. And it all comes back to the fact that the politicians are funding the scientists to give them what they want, which is something that they can instill fear and guilt into the population about in order to have power. And then the media and the activists are the bullhorn, right? The megaphone that puts that into just a giant global story, and nothing else matters. The truth doesn't matter one bit anymore in this discussion.
I think that was it.
Damn.
But those are just a couple little clips of things recently. I mean, there's a lot of different people talking about it. And of course, I mean, I'm open. I'm not anti-actual science. You can get into like a Foucauldian level of critique there, of saying that, yeah, you guys let your subjectivity overtake scientific communities. And we can't even stop back and look and say that we're actually taking objective looks at anything, because your ideology wins. Your ideology plays into it, and it just alters stuff so much. And that's the what Foucault called the biopower and knowledge power type stuff. And that's one of those areas where you can say, well, he had a bit of a point, because science is science unless science gets some sort of a highly motivated dipshits back behind it with who aren't going to actually use it unless it's useful to them, and then they can do what's called scientism. As we both saw, we've shared a couple clips of them lately of Richard Feynman and Carl Sagan warning about it, that there could be like a new level world religion of people who are kind of hijacking science and using it in this way that keeps it vague and strange to people. Because one of the things that's
impossible, but like I don't know how you would how could you not see that as being possible?
Well, I mean, I think we watched it really actually happen with the Koof, and Larson just buys right into every single narrative with the Koof. And I'm not one to say that it was just 100% wrong. I'm one to also say there's obviously major problems in all that stuff that they claim and made claims about, like just the whole level of the idea of there was a scientific community yelling at us that natural immunity was worse than there's just so many things that just like right off of the bat, you're like, what are you guys talking about? And their triage was shit. Their triage was dipshitted. It was so dumb that I couldn't even believe that they were talking about that. And that's just a recent thing. I mean, I think that level that we got to see in a micro scale of just how badly scientism made stuff wonky, this is that times 1,000. And there's people who have designs on motivations on it. We all know, we all kind of believe maybe on this side of the aisle that some of that emergency power stuff, the Rahm Emanuel stuff, never let an emergency go to waste, that they use that emergency for their benefit. This is the ultimate long-term forever emergency. If they can ever sell it hard enough as that, to get just unilateral powers to do stuff. And the thing that's the worst about the scientism thing is, just like you always be critical of like religions and say, well, there's little bits of truth in that religion, but then of course they got the wonky stuff, but then there's truth in it. Scientism is that on crack. You know what I mean? There's little truth in it. There's going to be truth in it everywhere. There's going to be little experts in it all over the place, but then there's going to be,
well, it's hard to sell a complete lie.
Yeah.
It's easier if you say some things that are verifiably true, and then they're like, oh, see, they were honest here. Why would they not be honest elsewhere?
So all I know, one of the reasons I point to all that is because those guys are talking about larger climate stuff, but we know that this is a very specified case of the Salt Lake. And I don't know the details of the specific case of the Salt Lake. And a lot of that stuff very well might be true and might be worrisome, Yeah. Maybe it's 100% true about the Great Salt Lake. I don't know. The problem is, like, I haven't had time to look into or hear any rebuttals or hear any, there's always an expert, for every PhD, there's an equal and opposite PhD. There's always certain experts who can like rebut something. So you hear these new claims that come out in this alarmist way, and they always, the alarmism makes its way around the world before, the counter argument gets out of bed. But you hear this go, and you see the New York Times suddenly pushing on it. But in the middle of it, we know that there's a design on getting access and power over this part of the world by certain organizations that already use power in that scientism sort of way. So I can't speak scientifically to what's true or what's not true about the Salt Lake thing. All I know is these scientism schmucks have their designs on this place. So watch out. Like, we need to stop and say, hold up, don't run and spasm freak out because these guys say so. Maybe it's all right. Maybe that's 100% true, but we got to verify.
Yeah, I'm not like averse to thinking that maybe climate change is a big thing, but I'm absolutely adverse to trusting almost anyone. Really.
Yeah, that's just exactly me too. And then, maybe this is 100% true. Maybe we won't be here in Salt Lake. I'd put the $1,000 bet right down now with John Larson, and that's just going off of my gut. Beyond that, it could be totally true. Salt Lake is a stinky sludge pit, and we've all known that since forever. And I'm sure that they've been pumping in crap into it since forever, and who knows if they could ever get an answer for it. Maybe it's 100% true. The problem is you guys are Chicken Little. I have this thing titled Chicken Little John. I don't know.
Yeah, I saw that.
Maybe the sky will actually fall in one moment, but usually what happens with Chicken Little is the fox is trying to get you to scamper around and freak out and go and run into its pen. Who knows what's going on exactly with Salt Lake. We know it's been drying up, but the other level too is all this stuff is there's people. That's one of the reasons I point to Victor Davis Hanson. So much of that water stuff, they do have their hands on levers that lets water come and go, and it's man-made stuff, but it's not man-made because the whole globe is hot. It's man-made because they're able to divert, and they have a ton of control over how much water goes where. And who has that control or what is something to squint your eyes at and say, there's probably major mismanagement going on in central planning there with that. It's probably not just that the world's hot now. And
yeah, how is it the ones are constantly bitching about like power dynamics and things like that are not looking at this and saying like, well, maybe there's a power struggle here going on. Maybe somebody could take my sacred cow and try to gain power over me from that sacred cow.
Well, I wish they'd go the whole way, because like they'll point at like the business and the corporate, and the corporate that's also taking over their whole Pride Month stuff and uses it for their benefit and their own shielding. That they don't realize this guy Michael Reckenwald. He talks at the Mises Institute. He's an ex postmodern professor at NYU. He's been on to forever, and you can like look into his history. That the history of corporatism, the history of corporate, even the Ford, General Mills. All these guys from the start of it had designs behind their whole entire angle to grow a fascistic, corporatism from the start. They actually had these socialistic designs from the very beginning 100 years ago. And they did want to have this, the corporate side of the stuff was in on the state corporate merger from the start. They weren't ever just kind of mom and pop businesses who got taken over by greed or something like that. They've all been pushing towards this fascistic end of total power. And we see that Costco and Walmart and Amazon all have designs on that area, and they're the ones who create bottleneck regulation. And like I said, with Michael Reckenwald, he points out that the corporate guys, the Lynn or Larson or lefties will want to say, well, that's capitalism. No, that's corporatism. That's cronyism that uses government regulation to get its extra power and uses ESG type stuff to get extra power, uses fear mongering to scare people into making stupid moves that are against their own needs. And the corporate side of stuff, they want to call that capitalism. That's always been on the same side.
That's
right.
That's socialism. That's socialism masquerading as being anti-corporate. But at the global scale, socialism actually becomes the highest level of corporation. And that's what the progressive left is really trying to do in their political strategy.
they'll try to blame just about everything on capitalism. I remember it was a big thing when they were doing all the too big to fail businesses. Like, yeah, see, this is what capitalism gets us. And I'm like, really? You think that the very visible hand of government reaching in and pulling these failing businesses up is a symptom of capitalism?
Exactly. But if I want to reach out across the aisle to them and be on their side, I'll be like, yeah, hate the corporate. But you're going to call it capitalism or whatever. But we agree. We hate those corporate bullshitters as much as you guys hate them. But we hate them because they use the levers of, the Mussolini fascism. And they're all part of that whole thing that I look at too. You can say, I think Larson has this big anxiety thing of freaking out that these stupid idiot humans, corporatists, are going to ruin the planet. I have that too. I have that a little bit too, but I have it on a different level. I think it's people that he's going to align himself with are going to be the idiots who mess everything up. And I try to try to keep from getting as anxious as he is about it. But like, there's a level of me that just kind of looks at them, and it's not because they're going to ruin the planet in that way. It's because they're going to just seek authoritarian control, and if they pull it off, if they get it. But even that, I kind of agree with some other people that even if they get it, it'll be so stupid and unstable. They'll flub everything up, and there'll be a lot of pain in the interim, but they'll mess everything up so bad that we'll go back to reality somehow.
It'll still be capitalism's fault.
Yeah. But
in conjunction with patriarchy, of course.
For sure. Reality always bats last, but how many people die in the interim is the worry,
Yeah.
So, I try to not freak out about, it's strange to say that in a weird way, I share the same worries that Larson has. I just think it's different idiots. And I don't necessarily think it's global warming is going to kill us. I think it's idiots, centralized planners who block us all from access to things that help us survive and thrive because they're idiot central planning ideas like the commies did. I guess I'm just repeating myself there, but it's a freaky weird time, and
it's fun though, right?
Yeah, it's fun. We'll see what happens. We'll see. I do think Salt Lake's going to go through weird changes over the next 20 years, but I don't think they're going to be the changes Larson says they are.
I'm sure it will. What if I told Larson that that air quality is what's causing people to kill themselves?
It probably has more to do with it.
Back him up into a corner. I'm just like, okay, do I say that Salt Lake is a doomsday ticking bomb for climate change, or do I, because that could bolster, if he talked about the air quality causing more suicides, that could bolster that claim, but it would also kind of fuck over his claim that the church is uniquely terrible to gay people.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I got to go back to watching Mormon No More. I don't like it so far. It's got a weird feeling to it. I don't know. You should. You didn't watch. Do you have Hulu? You didn't watch the Under the Banner of Heaven.
I really have no desire to watch Under the Banner of Heaven.
But this Mormon No More is on the same one, but it's got a strange feeling to me. Like, something to me feels really weird watching this family of two women who left their husbands to marry each other, and the families that are just sitting there confused in the middle of it all. And then it's all strange and awkward and weird. And then they go, it's Mormonism's fault. It's got that John DeLynn Larson movement, and like, this whole situation is Mormonism's fault. And I can't picture another situation in the U.S. where, maybe if they were born in San Francisco to some hippie parents or something, they would have gone in the right path from the start. But I think in pretty much most places throughout the entire world, they would have been tempted to go the heterosexual route. And it's not a uniquely Mormon problem that everybody's all of a sudden going gay after they already have a family or something like that. But I don't know.
Oh boy,
that's a whole different subject. But yeah, it's weird. I think it's a weird show to act like it's some big triumph for homosexual families or something like that. I think seems like nothing but a strained, heartbreaking situation. That's all there is to it.
I'm hoping this doesn't become a trend of ex-Mormon media in the mainstream.
Yeah, and it's been going hard. Even John Lynn's been complaining about it, to his credit. I mean, he's saying, like, I'm getting kind of gassed out. Yeah, Lynn said, I'm getting kind of gassed out of all these. He said that. Yeah.
Really?
Said
I don't think most ex-Mormons will get tired of it, because most people, it's taken people a long time to get tired, to get like superhero fatigue with all this Marvel shit they're pumping out. But they're just starting to. But I don't know. We'll see.
All right. Well, I think that's how. I wonder how many I'll split this into. I don't know that there's that much to edit out of it, but I'll probably split it into 3 again. And if I can find good spots and that sort of deal. But all righty. Well, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, no
It's a
problem.
long one. Yeah. I'll do 3, I think. Okie dokie.
All right.
Thanks a
I'll
lot.
see you, man.
All right, later. No more QAnon.